It's a lovely day here in the south coast of England, and it gives me great pleasure this week, and every week it's given me it gives me great pleasure, but this week we're very, very lucky to have Eid Azar with us. Not only are his wines some of my favorite wines coming out of Lebanon today, and we'll get on to those eventually, but as Mark and Mark pointed out, Eid is an epidemiologist, and I think if there's one profession in the world to which everyone's attention is currently turned because of the COVID-19 pandemic, it is infectious diseases and epidemiology. And we are going to try today to blend as much as we can Eid's worlds, the two worlds, the worlds of medicine and the worlds of wine. The film that we are marketing and promoting each week is Wine and War. And we're at pains to stress that it's not just war in the traditional sense that the film is about. War in terms of Wine and War is a struggle. It is our homage to the Lebanese who for thousands of years have struggled, be it economically, be it socially, be it militarily with wars and occupation. And now today, Lebanon finds itself in another street fight with the twin perils of financial catastrophe and the health emergency that is threatening us all in our daily lives and our livelihoods. So we will try and have what I hope will be a very enriching and upbeat and not too depressing conversation today, and one that I hope really will typify what our film is about. So I'm going to just jump straight in, Eid. Glad to have you here. Glad you're looking so well. You're at the hospital now, and are you working on the front line?
Hello. Actually, just it's a pleasure to be with you, and it's a pleasure also to try to talk about all this art, wine, medicine. So yeah, I'm at the hospital. I'm just the building next to St. George Hospital where I work, and I'm an infectious disease specialist. And so it's the right time for this specialty, for all this Corona and COVID-19 stuff. And we work some basic research as microbiology and some epidemiology. So we've been busy for the last couple of months. On a good note, Lebanon actually did very well with Corona. So we only had 3 deaths per million. So that's probably the best number that you can measure outcome of any country. So places like Italy, they had 460. In Sweden, up to 800. I think UK was a little bit low between the two. But in Lebanon, we were spared we didn't have a big wave of Corona. Now it's, the country is opening again. So people are starting to go out and back to normal as much as normal. But like Michael said, we had another huge challenge, which is the economic collapse, which is going to be, I think, one of a kind.
Okay. I want to take you into more of a kind of philosophical zone just for a bit and say, because you and I are of a certain age, what does war mean to you, and how is war, and I'm talking more in the traditional sense, so how has it shaped you? And what were your earliest memories of conflict?
Actually, I also, on a personal level, was a bit more lucky than a lot of people my age. I'm actually 46. I'm born in end of 74, just beginning of the Lebanese war in 75. I grew up in an area next to Zahleh, which is called a small village called Obeideh. That part of Lebanon, the level of violence by whatever you had in mind of pictures of Beirut and other parts in the 70s and 80s, we were spared the big violence. It was actually occupied by the Syrian early on, and they left in 2005. So I remember vividly the 1982 Israeli invasion, because they just arrived. Our village was the limit actually before of the first invasion of the South Lebanon part. So I went to Beirut for the university for my medical training in 1992. And I think one of the eras that people don't talk much about is Beirut in the 90s, the post-war Beirut. So this is a fantastic, actually, it was cleaner. It was much more fun probably than now. My medical school, it's the Jesuit one, the St. Joseph, which is exactly on the green line separating East and West Beirut. So like when I parked the car the first day to come to the entrance exam, there was a sign of, you have mines, you cannot walk. One of the first classes, it was actually in the church. It was half reconstituted to be a class. Then there was this rebuilding of Beirut. So I had the chance in 1994 to visit Beirut before the Solidaire project. So we toured Beirut, the destroyed Beirut. So that's pretty much my personal. So I was, like I said, I was not displaced. I did not witness personal violence. So, but it affected a lot of. So if you want to define war as deviation from normalcy, I think all of us in this region here never had a normal life since, I don't know, since I was born.
But you were 1 when the war began, so presumably from 1 till 16, even though you were in Ablies and it wasn't relatively untouched by the war apart from 82, you must have grown up in a state of, at the very least, tension.
Oh yeah, definitely. That's why I tried to put like 2 levels, because there's a lot of people of my age who were part of the violent days, like they were displaced, their house were destroyed, they have family members that died in war. I had, I was a bit luckier in that. So, but I can, remember vividly that if you want to go from my village to Beirut, which is now, it's a 45-minute trip. It used to take us sometime 8 or 10 hours because of army blockade. So nothing was normal in the normalcy of, what the West understand as normal life. So there was absence of any form of government because, we all know what a militia was. So the people who are my age, which I call them the before 1889, so they know what war was. So because I think it's not really when I was born that changed your perception of things. I think if you were adolescent or you just were above 13, 14-year-old by 89, 90, this is the last chapter in the Lebanese war. You still have memories of war. You still have vivid memories, even if you didn't live it directly, but you still know how people, got displaced, the death, destruction, absurdity of war. Then there is another generation that they are younger than me, and some of them, they are in the revolution now. And I'm, all for the revolution, but the problem is they don't understand, they don't have a collective memory of what war is. They think it's just a joke or so. So I think I'm one of the last what applied to as the war generation.
And then you really achieved the Lebanese dream in a way. You became a doctor. I mean, it's every Lebanese parent's dream that their child becomes a doctor, or at least an engineer or a lawyer or something. And you went to America as far as I remember, and you worked in New York. What was it like for you working in New York? How did you find New York and the US in general? Were you homesick? And lastly, what was the moment when you suddenly decided that you wanted to make wine back in Lebanon? Maybe that question's too big, but I mean, you went to America. What were your feelings? How was Lebanon still in your heart? And when did you decide to come back to make wine? And what inspired you?
Yeah, so actually, again, if you go back to 1992, as a young, person at that time, even your professional choices, they were not that diverse. It was, and probably still is, a very classical educational system. So I choose to do medicine. I don't regret it, but I love it. I love my job. Probably at the time it was not a very thought of process, but I end up having fantastic years in the 90s in Beirut. So as I said, I touched down a little bit on before. So I think I call the 90s the forgotten years of Lebanon. Everybody thought, because after 2000, there was a much more urbanization of Beirut and Lebanon.
I agree with you. I agree with you. I went to Lebanon in 92. It was a great period.
So, yep. So it was, so after, discovering Beirut, living here and all of that and finishing medicine, I decided that, you should go and try some new experience and medical education per se. The United States continues to be the most structured place to be as trainee. Though I come from what they call the French University, which is the Jesuit one. So I did my medicine actually in French, but I decided to go to the States for, like I said, many reasons. It's a better place to study and all of that. Went to Philadelphia for the first 2 years, and I did internal medicine there. Then I did my infectious disease specialty in New York City. I'm not American now. I don't have American passport, but I consider myself New Yorker. I love New York, and New York is one of those places where if you, my definition of a New Yorker, if you live in New York for more than 1 week and you still like it, you become a New Yorker. So it's a different place. It's a place where ideas the flow of ideas, exchange of innovation, of experience is astronomically high as compared to. So as part of exploring things in the city, and I probably have this character trying to all the time to find something new to do or experience. So I started drinking. Before getting to the States, I wasn't into wine at all. Wine was this kind of drink that you do twice per year, Christmas time, stuff like that. So it wasn't like, I had no interest or never been well exposed to wine in Lebanon before I went to the States. Actually, I think even a smaller, my wife, she bought me some, 101 wine discovery course, stuff like that. So this is what the first time I went there, we had this basic thing about wine drinking and winemaking. Then in Philadelphia, there's something also very interesting about Philadelphia city per se. It's almost a full BYO city. So it's bring your own bottle to any restaurant. And in Philly, you eat very well. I'm not sure if people knows that. Philly is the pre-lab, which is where people try idea before they get to New York to make them happen. So it was a fantastic deal. You buy your wine, you eat well. So it became like a 3 to 4 times per week habit to do so. Then, we start to develop a taste and interest to wine. Then when I moved to New York,
what kind of wines were you drinking?
So I started with Chateauneuf du Pape. I remember very well. And I think even I had like Chateau Lanert was one of my first one. It was something very well priced at Philadelphia at Pennsylvania liquor store. I remember this is one of the first bottles I start to buy. So Chateauneuf, I drink way less Chateauneuf now, but that was my first palate in terms. And I think it's probably one of the easy easy style of wine to start drinking. Then I did a bit of Bordeaux. Then with time, more my palate went now toward Piemonte, Old Rioja, definitely Burgundy, white Riesling. So it was a change in the taste or in the way. I still believe that there's fantastic Bordeaux, but they are a bit less accessible, and it's a long discussion. If you want to go there, we can go there.
So at what point did the idea of going from being an enthusiast to saying, you know what, I want to go home and make it? I mean, were you seeing what was happening in Lebanon?
No, so then I, answer a bit of your question. I never had the disconnect from Lebanon because we used to come twice per year in the religious way. So I need to spend at least 2 weeks or even more per year in Lebanon. So even we lived there for 6 years, but we never like left Lebanon and came back, to speak with an accent, or we always been connected to my friend here, to my life here. So and before I move on, I'm one of the few who I don't have, because this is very typical for Lebanese. They are either pro-West or against West. So I'm not in that ideology. I think there is a great thing in both worlds, and there is, bad things in both. So I'm not sort of, I don't do comparative approach to what would have been my life if I had stayed in the state as compared to what would have been because I came here. Because in that comparative approach, you always come onto trivial details, and it's very personal. So what might be, true for me, or something that worked for me may not work for another person. So when I go to New York or to now, it's just I feel like I'm going back home. I really wouldn't. Since we left, except last year, every year I go for a week, and it's a week full of eating and drinking and visiting and reconnecting with people I know, getting back and connect with the experience I had in New York City. So just to continue, when I left Philadelphia, I went to New York. I was lucky to be part of a couple of serious wine drinking circles. One of them actually is at the Cervantes, the Spanish Cultural Center. There's a fantastic guy called Elio San Miguel, which he does like 2 classes per week, 12 people, 12 bottle of wine, all around the team, and it's blind. So I used to do those courses at least once per week, and then this group had another extension for, when you get you're into wine with, I know how it works. So somebody will say, okay, let's try 89 Bordeaux versus 88, and this is how it grew in terms of the experience, the exposure, the discussion, meeting winemakers who visit New York. Every Saturday at Rosenthal, which is a very good importer for Burgundy wine, they used to have a very generous, very interesting wine tasting. So I was a regular visitor there. So New York was the explosion of the drinking part. As far for the making, I think it was a romantic idea. Like most of the people who drink wine, they always have this romantic idea. One day I'll be making wine. So Lebanese wine at the time, I was less. I didn't understand wine from Lebanon at the time, except for Muzar, which was well known by the people that I used to drink wine with. So I start drinking more Muzar because, it's the bottle that they know. And that's fantastic old Muzars, which I personally like them. Even this white, to me, it's fantastic old white wines. So, but I was less in knowledge. Back in 2007, when I left New York, I had less knowledge of what is a Lebanese wine. So, came back in 2007, 2008, start working as infectious disease in the same hospital that I am now. From 2000 till 2010, I was just focused on drinking here. And 2010, I was walking in the mountains, in a very nice mountain called Kneisseh Mountain. It's a small one. It's untouched by the cement invasion of other places, where I found some very old terraces where wild vines are growing. So start asking right and left, what's this land, what was, and they told me this is a village that ceased to exist in the 1950s. It was all planted in grapes. And probably phylloxera actually wiped those vines in the late 50s, early 60s, because they woke up one day on one season and they had no grapes. All the vines died, and all of them, they were ungrafted. So we don't have a full documentation, but was the story of the people who used to live in this village. And at this point I said, all right, we don't need more empirical data than this. If a village in Lebanon at 1400-meter altitude and a beautiful mountain that was planted for God knows how long, because with just on the side, we bought a plot where they have those tanks, those rock tanks of winemaking. They date for hundreds of years ago. So you had the historical evidence, you have the empirical evidence telling you that it was planted. So I did this, we were talking about this today, and I think even Jeff Bezos touches on this. What you make a decision, the best decision you make is when you're 70% sure. Yeah, and we didn't wait for, expert and analyses, and everybody asked me did you analyze the soil? We did that later, but at the time I didn't care, just it seems right because of the reasons that I said. And we started buying lands. We became 3 partners. And at a later stage, that's in 2010 to 2012. In 2012, we were in Burgundy for a personal wine tour. And we walked into the at Yves Confiron. He's one of the very prominent winemaker in Von Romanée. And Yves, we just been tasting at his wine, and after 10 minutes, from one story to another, I said, listen, I have this crazy idea to start Pinot Noir at very high altitude, between 14 to 1600 meters, because it's much light. The weather is completely different than the Bekaa plain. It will compensate for the heat. So, and the idea is that we're not north, but we have altitude. So the altitude will change the climate, and the bet was that this microclimate may be a good place to produce Pinot Noir. And he just answered, pourquoi pas? Why not? And it was just it. It was from that moment till today, it's just a gentleman agreement. He comes and visits us 2 or 3 times per year. We go there, we're always in connection. We went through this we got all the, he gave us this unconditional expertise into selection of vines, building of terraces, and all of the, till bottling of the first vintages. Briefly, in 2014, when we planted the Pinot, we just realized that we have to wait for a couple of years now before you even taste the first wine. So it was, let's try to see other places. And part of this exploration of the Lebanese climates, I started to taste some Cinsault and Carignan and single variety produced from villages like Kefraya and other places in West Dakar. So in the beginning, we thought, let's do a second red from the village, from the plain, or we choose Kefraya village because it's actually a fantastic microclimate. It's the hilliest part of the southern tip of the valley. So, and it's like Burgundy, the same. If you plant in the valley, this is one of the problems, a misnomer. When you say Bekaa wine valley, or vines from the valley, it's actually parallels to me the lowest quality, because if you put a plant inside the flatland, they will have a lot of water in the beginning of the season. Then it dries very fast and becomes very hot. So they will never develop a root system or extract something of interest, and they become very stressed. And these are the vines that sometimes are irrigated, and they don't represent what you should do. What you should do is to use the hilly part. It's the Piemonte of the mountain. And at the Piemonte of the mountain, especially if you face the east part, where you see really, you look at you face a sun that's east 100%, and you have the mountains. The mountains, they have, there is a snow at the top of the mountain during winter time, even during spring. So you will have a continuous irrigation by the melting water of the snow. So the water reserve is better, the drainage is better. And what we came up to a conclusion, and you can see all the work was empirical, was not theoretical. We try, it works, we keep it. It don't work, we leave it. So the name of the wine is Vertical 33, and Vertical 33 comes from the idea that we are on latitude 33. We are very, very, very south. We are south of Tunisia. We are south of Malaga. So we should be very hot, but just for the European to put us on the map. People from Europe, they are sometimes surprised if we ski in Lebanon, not because we are east, we are very south. If you are south of, from Milano, you have to fly 4 hours, 5 hours south. So why we have all of that? Because we have the latitude.
No,
so
sure.
The mountain changed everything. On that latitude, on that verticality, we call it vertical 33 because latitude 33. Into verticality, you have the Pinot at the highest level. We started the Cabernet in 2016. And we have a Cinsault and a Carignan that comes from the latitude of 1,000 meters.
It's funny, you talk about surprises. The grapes that you planted, and you and I have had discussions about this, they were the Pinot, the Carignan, the Cinsault, and the Obeideh. Now, 5-6 years ago, now no one really bats an eyelid. In fact, now people would say, yes, these are the grapes that everyone's interested in, the sexy grapes to plant. 5-6 years ago, people would have still seen that as a brave choice. Did you have any doubters who were saying, why aren't you planting Syrah, Cabernet, Chardonnay, whatever? I mean, what prompted you to go? And when I heard you were doing this, I was very excited. But remember, I was a lone voice as well back then. The guy from New York who's drinking all these, expensive wines, probably international style wines. You come back to Lebanon and you say, I'm gonna use Obeideh, I'm gonna use Cinsault, I'm gonna use Carignan, all the heritage grapes. What convinced you, and what were people telling you at the time?
So, yep, from the New York experience, I was actually also at the end, at the beginning of the change of the pendulum, if you want to call it the post-Parkerized wine. So from 2005-4 to 2007-8 before I left. So I had a lot of very interesting wine that they came from indigenous grapes, from places they are less manipulated. So from a philosophical perspective for winemaking, I start to be on the what you're gonna call it true expression of wine, of grapes, where they have less manipulation, less gaming, no additive, and you can have probably a full webinar about are we into natural wine or not. I'm not really even in that ideological discussion because we are very minimalist. We just use a bit of sulfite. I think a little bit of sulfite is like a surgeon that washes his hands before he go for surgery, because 9 times out of 10 nothing happened. When it's bad, it goes horrible, and there is nothing bad in using a little bit of sulfite. But so I don't want to be labeled as natural wine, but as natural as it can be. On the other hand, so this accumulation of terroir-based, simple, straight expression of the grape, let the vine and the nature do the wine, and then we just assist nature at the winery expressing this. That was already a philosophical approach that I had to winemaking. So came to Lebanon, Pinot probably because I love Pinot, and it was Eve and all of that, and this crazy idea we got, like, let's use the altitude to our advantage. That justified the Pinot. And like I said before, I didn't wait till I'm 100% sure. It doesn't work like this in the real world. You just have some time to just do it. And there's a lot of people that talk and still talk in Lebanon. A lot of the time, just if I may call it nonsense, it was just based on assumption. One of the reasons why we have this financial collapse, because we have this culture of talking about stuff that we don't even try to understand. So I didn't pay that much attention for that, all this bavardo, if you want to call it, regarding what works and what doesn't work for Lebanon. Then for the grapes, the Cinsault and the Carignan, namely, to me, it was a discovery when I start to taste even a not well-made single variety wine made from the West Bekaa. Because, when you don't, if you never had this in single grape, single variety, you cannot even imagine the potential of wine made this way, because everybody was doing coupage, everybody was just mixing. And if you mix altitudes, you mix grapes, you add oak, you have no personality. You have a wine. Sometimes they are good, they are drinkable, but they would not give you any idea about the origin of the product that you are eating. It's like you're eating a salad. You have like many ingredients. You cannot go back and say, okay, my lettuce was excellent. So you have to deconstruct the model. And when we started, and I think in 2013 2012 was the first time I tasted by, when you come to Lebanon, and it's a big family in Lebanon. So people walk to your house and say, hey, Doc, I want you to taste this wine. I want to taste you this. So the first time I remember vividly where I tasted Cinsault from Kefraya was made by a guy who he's doing homemade home wine, and they were not technically clean, but there was a substance. There was this lush fruit, beautiful structure that to me was like, oh, I've never had this with my perception of Lebanese wine, and this has tipped me toward, trying again. And not all the experiences were a success. If I want to name one, the Grenache, and to be fermented, because the first idea in theory you may get, if you want to do a single grape variety at 1,000 meters from the Bekaa Valley, you would think about Grenache being, similar to what you do at Châteauneuf-du-Pape and all of that. The Grenache was a bête noire. It was very, very, very difficult to ferment in a nice Grenache. We tried it in 14, 15, and 16 before we gave up, and now we do it with the rosé. We tried high yield, low yield, early harvest, late harvest. Just the skin did not ripe easily before just shooting the alcohol up to astronomical numbers. The Cinsault is just happy to live in Lebanon. It's just naturally adapted to the environment. The Carignan, we were lucky with 2 plots where we have some old Carignan. So we have to see now if we're gonna replant Carignan, how it's gonna be and where to put it and all of that. So for the Obeideh, it's a completely different story. The Obeideh story actually, it is funny because the grandfather of Joseph Hussein, one of our partners, he had a pergola, not a big one. It's around 1,500 meters, more than 100 years, ungrafted Obeideh from a village just above Zahleh to the east called Twaite. And it wasn't until 2015 till I got to know that, you know, they still own this plot. So it's like, why didn't tell me before? So, but it's just, you know, it was too busy, I never mentioned it, because this grape, they used to take those grapes and make arak from. So once I knew it, we just went, me and Eve, we checked it up and we said, okay, we're gonna ferment this. And it became more of a cult wine now for us. We're still looking into.
Yeah. I'd like to open it up to the floor if anyone's got any questions, because we're running out of time. I know your friend Norbert has a question that he wants to ask you.
Norbert, you're mute.
Here you go. Do you hear me? Yes. I want to change this, go back to war a little bit, but it's the war we're facing right now. From the first days that you had to work with this to go against this COVID, I was reading something in the States that some doctors have really just changed completely the first treatments they were giving 3 months ago, and they're completely doing something now today to combat the disease in making kind of a combination of different drugs and different things, and even in diets to get people better. Have you found that you've been doing kind of similar things? I mean, from the first time you were treating COVID to now, what has changed?
Oh, I think COVID discussion is you know how much the wine world is complex and nuanced, and people, you know, can argue over anything. Corona is the first disease that I know that split the world into million pieces. So every aspect of the disease is debatable in many ways. You know, herd immunity or not, how the cluster distribution, how do you get infected, why people get, some of them get symptoms, why others don't. And at the top of the discussion is treatment. So one refers to decide who should you treat. And one of the points that did not make it to mainstream media well, for many reasons, because of the nature of the pharmaceutical companies, is the fact that during outbreaks and epidemic, you cannot design a good study. There is a million variables. If you want to study something well and doing what's so-called RCTs, the randomized controlled trial, where you control all the variables except one thing that you would do. You know, you have one group A and group B. They should be exactly the same. And group A, let's say you give them a drug, the other don't give them, and then you measure their outcome. You cannot do that during outbreaks. Then outbreaks, the treatment is chaotic. You are working into, and you witnessed that very well in London. You don't know who should you bring into the hospital. You don't know who should stay at home. Some people, you know, they are very, very sick and then they made it. Some others, they look good and then you lose them. Timing to treatment because in the vast majority, they don't have any symptoms. You don't have to treat them at all. Then you have people who have a mild disease, which they do well anyway. And then you have the very, very, very sick people where whatever you do, they die. So treatment is for this window of moderately ill, where probably what you can do is to control the viral replication so it won't harm them at a later stage. So for that scheme, we didn't find much yet. Even I think Oxford, they came up with the, your media sometimes, and you can talk, you can have me talking for hours on this. Oxford, like, they were happy, and all the news was talking about finding out that dexamethasone, that's cortisone, right, is the cure for corona. Dexamethasone in medical field is like IV. It's like, give IV to patients. It's a drug that's used right and left. Doctors in the planet, whenever they have somebody with an inflammation, they will give them dexamethasone. It's one of the oldest things ever invented in medicine. So it cannot be the cure of, and it's not like, it's like you're telling me that, you have a patient and you give him some paracetamol. So there's no breakthrough in treatment. It's very, we still, as certified treatment, we have nothing. Personally, I need to disclose this. I'm a personal friend with the Diraoud, the French guy who from Marseille, the guy with the long hair who was all over the news with the chloroquine. So he's a personal friend, and because he's friend with Yves Confiron, the winemaker. So this is how we got to be friends, and we have students in common. We have PhD students in Beirut and Marseille in common between the two institutions. And he visited actually Lebanon, and he visited the Pinot. He was one of the first people to visit the vineyards up. And I think what he did at Marseille, and we duplicated at St. George Hospital here, using hydroxychloroquine for patients in that window of period where they are not too sick, but they are not too good, but they are not too bad. So, and I think in that part, hydroxychloroquine can be something of good use. Other than that, there's nothing proven yet.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions from the floor? Mark, do you want to repeat your question you did at the beginning? What was it, about art and science?
Yeah, I would love to know, in your opinion, is it art, as a doctor and a scientist, is it art that informs science, or is it science that informs art? And have you taken that into this philosophy into your winemaking skills?
Definitely. I think it's a fantastic question, because this is something that, we go through many times when we talk about science in general. And what I try to explain to people is the fact that, medicine and science, and probably winemaking also can follow the same, there has a nucleus of very clear scientific information. We know a lot in terms, and our knowledge in science has increased exponentially over the last 20 years in terms of knowing a new mechanism of action, molecular pathophysiology, and all of that. But all this knowledge is surrounded by a big cloud, if you want to call it, of unknowns. Some known unknowns and some unknown unknowns. So there's a lot of things that we know that we don't know them. And another part, we're not even aware of their existence as problems. And in that outer part, this is where art works. Art is at the base of art is balance. What makes the greatest painting is just a very good balance between the colors, between shapes. What makes the best wine is a balance between all the components, and that gives you a shape of personality. And sometime in medicine, a lot of time in medicine, you make decision artistically You don't do that if you're trying to correct a basic, let's say, sodium on a patient. It's something that's like the very strict scientific, easy to do. Or, you know, you have an HIV patient, you need to give him medication. That's clear. But beyond that, there is a lot of things that you do artistically. And in Corona, there was a lot of that. And Corona, all guide, you can easily see that the institution that failed in Corona were all those guideline-based, consensus-based, big institution like WHO, CDC, all of those. So, and the people who did the better are the people who followed intuition. They understand that they have a problem, they have to solve it. They dealt well with the unknown. So with that, I think there's no clear boundaries between science and art. There's no clear boundaries between winemaking, good science, and good medicine. It's just a mix of all of those.
Thank you.
Just one last question, Eid. What? Well, it's in two parts. Do your wines reflect in any way who you are, and what have you learned about yourself since you started making wine?
Well, another one of those questions. So I think they reflect reasonably the way, you know, the way we or me in specific think in general, because you know, in most what I do, I'm not a, you know, I understand guidelines very well. I'm a text, you know, I know the textbook very well, but I don't apply things literally. I don't apply textbook where textbook does not apply. So I'm not one of those people who would have came to Lebanon and get an idea to do, let's say, French wine in Lebanon. It's not something I would have done. So, and so this is very clear. The way of thinking helped the initial process happening. So the key decisions that I mentioned, you know, how we got into business, how we started the first thing, they reflect a very, you know, clear, thoughtful approach that express the way I think. But after that point, going, you know, forward, I think the wine become a creature on its own. So I don't control things after a certain point. So I don't, you know, now we lived it with the Cinsault, we lived it with the Carignan. Now we think we're gonna have 3 Pinots from 3 neighboring plots because they are completely different. I'm not trying to make things look like something. So in a way, you know, this is what I do in general. So I don't make them look like what I want them to look, except in the beginning, I make the environment for things to happen. So I'm not sure if my answer is clear.
Well, okay, let me put it this way. I look at your wines and I see them as earthy. I see them as real. I see them as, you know, there's a sense of humanity there. They're not dressed up. They're not wearing makeup. Then there's no bling in your wines. There's no heavy extraction dressed up in the finest oak that money can buy. These are earthy wines. These are country. If this was a woman, and I may be straying into un-PC territory here, but what the hell, this would be an unadorned, beautiful country girl. She hasn't gone to the city yet. She hasn't discovered the bright lights. This is, you know, an unadorned, natural country girl. Your wines have a sense of place. They are real. Are you that person?
Yeah, and what you describe is something, you know, so the reflection of the minimalist approach, if you want to call it, is very clear. So, you know, for me, the Cinsault, for example, following your line of thoughts, I call it like flamenco. It's something that's, you know, when you see, if you cannot see my Cinsault specifically as somebody who's dressed in a suit. They're never in a suit. They cannot wear a tie. They are not here to impress an image that they think they should have. So they have this freedom of expression, this the sense of freedom. Like I say freedom, because this is what we provided. I just only provided an environment for the freedom expression of those. So yes, I think I was part in that intervention, but once they start to have their own personality, I just let them go. I don't, stop later and say, okay, 2017 was a bit acidic, so I'm gonna make it, and I want them to be less acidic. I don't do that. And by not doing that, you're always surprised now with the second phase of those wine, how they evolve. A lot of theories we had when they were younger wine turned out to be complete nonsense. We thought that, this one's gonna die off in 2 years. 2 years later, he's one of the best we have. So it's a lot of, and simple, we're very empirical. I only believe in empirical approach. And I do that in my science, in my research, with my patient. You try things, they work, you stick with them. I hate theories, especially when you don't have any base for those theories. And once it makes sense, you let the experiment go. Once it becomes a personality, you don't listen to, you don't have to impress all the people from day one. It's another big problem in Lebanon. In Lebanon, this is one of the fundamental problems, I think. It's you come up with an idea that within 10 minutes, you want all the people to, to salute your work. And, we don't have we're not patient. We're very short, we're very Mediterranean here. We want things done, in a few hours. So,
we're a transactional people. We want something for something. We can't wait long term.
Definitely. So that's another thing that, we clearly decided to invest time and energy. And I knew that, because I know winemakers in other parts of the planet. Some of them, it took them, 10 years just to come up with their first bottle that makes sense. They struggled, they just, so I think it started to pay off even with all this problems that we have in the country, and hopefully we'll be able to continue what we do.
Good. Eid, I'd just like to end by thanking you. You are one of the, as far as I'm concerned, one of the great pioneers at the moment. I think your wines are relevant. I think your wines are interesting. And I think your wines are authentic. And long may they thrive. I must confess, as you know, I've not been to your winery. It's going to be one of the first things I do the next time I'm fortunate enough to go to Lebanon. At the same time, I wish you all the best in your other struggle, keeping the Lebanese safe and well. And thanks again. Thank you for coming, and thank you for being part of the process, for being part of the Wine and War family, and for contributing such an enriching debate. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all.